Over 80% of viewers aren't subscribed. Make sure to hit that button, it would certainly mean a lot to me. When a major airline completely revises its identity, it is always going to raise eyebrows. Still in recent times, well, I say recent despite time flying and this being before the turn of the decade, Lufthansa was one of those airlines that adjusted its branding. The redesign caused discussion, as with any change, but I really want to examine the change further. Feedback, controversy, and so much more. In February 2018, heritage met the future, as Lufthansa unveiled its new brand design. Keeping with the smartness and tradition of Germany, the redesign wasn't, say, a radical change. The key highlight of the rebranding was the modernization of the iconic Lufthansa crane logo. The tail, though, didn't really change, as the crane was really still the central element. However, Lufthansa did move towards a more contemporary and sleeker appearance. It reflected the direction Lufthansa largely wanted to head and the need to change to preserve its legacy and perception through the years. Pretty valid reasoning when it comes to a redesign, if I do say so myself. Beyond a change to the livery, inside the aircraft there were also revisions to the cosmetic feel of the airline, all to try and enhance the overall passenger experience. So what was the initial reaction to the design change? Well, as I do feel for a lot of changes made at airlines nowadays, while the initial focus and probably the immediate reaction will be on thoughts on the livery and how it aligns with the brand, the focus then very quickly shifts towards what needs to actually be changed and not necessarily a surprise, but most of the time it doesn't come down to the livery or the branding, but actually a central focus put on customers and their place seeing higher importance. In recent history, Lufthansa has definitely experienced a pretty big downfall when you take a look at customer perception. Its reviews have dwindled, it has a dated product, and other cracks in the airline have very quickly emerged. So a changing of the brand, all things considering, was potentially a good idea on executives' part. You'd argue, though, that a lot of the focus was put more so on investing that time spent redesigning the brand actually on the customers, at least from the travelling public. With branding, it is also hugely essential. That is something that cannot be ignored, and especially for Lufthansa. While it at the end of the day was a cosmetic change, it is still something that is required to keep up with current trends and more. As for the actual brand change, going back to the reason why we're here, well, it wasn't necessarily widely received positively. There was undoubtedly an understanding of why it was plain, simple, and genuinely sleek, but removing the yellow on the crane and from the aircraft on the outside was highly criticised. People love the yellow, and to see it go missing was not something that was overly appreciated, especially when you plant this aircraft in, say, overcast lighting. It can be a bit of a snooze fest. Looking back on a rollout over 5 years ago, the livery has now settled into more aircraft programs, and is now, I wouldn't necessarily say appreciated by all, but certainly accepted. It's become the new normal, and as with any livery, time can heal initial criticisms, as acceptance does arrive. As mentioned a few seconds ago, while the livery wouldn't change for those who disliked it, the raw emotion just wouldn't be there 5 years later on, and you definitely would have gotten more used to it. Airlines that revise their branding typically do this for a reason. It won't just be out of the blue, and as you imagine, it is a major commitment. Not just the process to reach launch, but eventually the rollout, which takes years and years when considering the time to repaint aircraft and reconfigure airports and the inside. Airlines could adjust their branding for a shift in their business model or direction. While not in the case of Lufthansa, who was sticking to a full-service carrier, it is a very valid reason for change. Additionally, some carriers may believe that with inbound next-generation planes that bring large levels of efficiencies, new cabins, and a general changing of the guard, it's time to update the branding to reflect the change and to be applied on this new aircraft. This can certainly be seen with Air India, and sticking with the Indian carrier can be a method to actually respond to a history of poor customer feedback, maybe a bad public perception or a bad financial position. Air India are completely revolutionizing their brand to head in a more Western direction and try and say goodbye to all the difficulties that they have experienced. At Lufthansa, however, the immediate refresh didn't maybe move in the direction Lufthansa had intended, something I've ushered throughout this video. But that doesn't mean Lufthansa can't turn around its fortunes, right? Well, substantial investments in cabin products, for one, is a hugely pivotal start for the German flag carrier that has long been battling negative customer feedback directly related to a product that, according to many, and especially on long-haul services, does lag. For Lufthansa, a full-service airline offering a product that even in economy lacks over competitors isn't necessarily a good look. And when you pair that with their already high prices, well, it's a recipe for disaster, and one of the main reasons why you've seen their rating tumble, paired with much more. But see, tracking back to the beginning of this video, I mentioned the iconic yellow disappearing on the outside of the aircraft. Interestingly, while adored by many, on the grand scheme of things, this very much love of yellow can be attributed directly back to aviation lovers. The branding won't make a difference for the vast majority of flyers, but it did allow the airline to undergo a refresh, something it believed it needed to do and to keep up with the times. When taking a look at rebrands, how many people actually intently analyze it? You wouldn't imagine that it would be a large percentage of their overall customer base. You could say it's the vocal minority, and I think we're all definitely a part of that. So these are just some of the many reasons why an airline may rebrand. For Lufthansa, it was either a rebrand or a refresh, however you choose to put it. But it was done for a reason, and all for intensive purposes, a very important one. To update an iconic brand and allow it to move into the next era. But interestingly, not all rebrands will be widely accepted, and I'd argue that based on immediate reaction, the Lufthansa scheme wasn't entirely adored at first sight, and some would argue that it was a branding that was timeless and didn't need to change. So now, many years on, what do you make of this rebrand? Do you believe it is a subtle yet acceptable update to the iconic airline, or do you still dislike it? Or maybe are you in the camp that sits with branding is simply irrelevant if the end product being put forward to the customers who are actually flying on the aircraft is not up to standards and hardly worth the amount that the very carrier is charging? Which in the case of Lufthansa, which again to remember is a full-service airline, is definitely a sticking point. Please let me know, and if you'd like me to explore other rebrands of carriers right around the world in recent history, the public reaction, maybe the criticisms and the reasons for change, let me know down below in the comments, as there certainly isn't a shortage of them given the scope. Immediately I can think of Qantas, Cathay Pacific and American Airlines, and all of these had pretty controversial opinions initially, but definitely grew on people with time. Maybe the same could be said for Lufthansa, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. As always, if you have any thoughts on today's video, feel free to let me know down below in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I'll indeed see you next time for more coverage on the aviation world. And we'll fly.